A big thank you to mpb.com for sponsoring this week's video.
Morning and welcome to Tuscany here in Italy. I'm here on my honeymoon with Emily and the baby, who hopefully at the moment are both asleep. It's 5:45 in the morning, so I'm hoping that I've got a couple of hours for photography in that village there. It's called Petroio. Terrible pronunciation, I'm sure, but yeah, isn't it lovely? Absolutely stunning. So yes, I plan to go and take some photos there this morning, and you're going to come with me if you want. I suppose you're under no obligation to continue watching the video now that you know what it is. Although also, as another fun bit of mystery, I'm using a different camera to the one that I usually use. It's whew. Did you get it? Cobwebs everywhere. Do you remember a couple of weeks ago when I was talking about how I don't like going to the woods first thing in the morning because I don't know what I'm going to find? It's much the same with paths like this. Luckily I'm not in Australia or somewhere like that, because when I have been paths like this in the past, I just always assume I'm going to be eaten by a snake. Not so much of a concern in Italy, I suppose. Anyway, I won't try and keep on to this tiny bit of suspense any longer. Do you also remember a video a couple of weeks before the video I just talked about? I was testing travel cameras, and what I meant by travel cameras, on that day at least, was cameras like the Fuji X100V, the Sony A7C, basically small cameras but very capable cameras that you could take away with you, just throw in a bag or a big pocket. Anyway, I quite enjoyed making that video and I enjoyed the cameras. However, I did mention in that video that one of my favourite lenses ever was the, bear with me a second, Lumix 20mm f1.7, this little lens here. And lots of people said, well, if you love that lens so much, why don't you just get a tiny little Lumix and strap that to the lens and just be done with it? And when I was reading those comments, I thought to myself, oh yeah, that's an obvious thing to do. So basically, long story short, here is the Lumix GX1. Now this is one of my favourite cameras ever. And I first bought one of these in 2011, 2012 was it? I can't remember, but basically it's the first camera that I ever fell in love with for its functionality. And its looks, actually, it looks like a really cool camera. Anyway, today I'm going to shoot with it. Petroio. Also, this video is sponsored by MPB, which is where I got this camera, and it was £52. And admittedly, it's not in the best of shape. The screen on the back is kind of peeling away a tiny bit. It was listed as well used. But let's go and see what a £52 camera can do, shall we? Maybe starting here. I don't think there are snakes in Italy. Right, carry on. The first bit of light is just catching those windows on the right hand side, which looks nice. Oh, and the first bit of light is also hitting the, I want to say tower, I don't know what that is. Bell tower? At the very top of the village. See what that looks like. Now you might remember me moaning in that travel camera video that the A7C, the Sony A7C, doesn't have a front dial, and how that dial typically is really important to photographers. Well, this camera doesn't have a front dial either, but it has quite a sensible solution, I think, to combat that, which is that the back dial you can press. And when you press it, in aperture priority mode at least, it flips between aperture and exposure. So as you can see, I can take down the exposure, and then once I've done that, I can press it and it goes to aperture, and I can narrow the aperture if I so desire. Obviously it does different things in different modes, but quite a clever solution that, I think. Right, I should really get into the village before before I've got to go back. Nice bit of red on green. You might remember a couple of months ago I did a video in Venice where I was doing some street photography, and I was saying that one of my favourite things in the world is walking around somewhere in Italy early in the morning in the sunshine. It's definitely still the case 2 months on. It's a cool door. Got a very reassuringly loud shutter, this. Listen to this. I like that. Right, a couple of notable first impressions second time around, and I'm sorry, I'm having to keep my voice down still because it is early and it's a Sunday, so I don't want to be wildly unpopular by waking all the locals up. Yeah, first impressions second time around. This grip is so comfortable for a tiny little compact camera. It's amazing, as is the thumb grip. I'd forgotten that. And with the benefit of 10 years more experience using lots of other cameras which are bigger and less comfortable, I really appreciate it. A thumb dial, I've already touched on. I think that's a really good implementation. One thing I will say is I am definitely hamstringing this camera with the use of this lens without an ND filter, because I want to shoot a lot of 1.7, but I can't, because even now it's getting a bit bright, and the camera has a maximum shutter speed of 4,000th of a second, so that's a bit of an issue. And also when it comes to brightness and shooting in places like Tuscany, really sunny places, there's no viewfinder. Now from memory, you could buy an external viewfinder, which I might look to do, but I don't have one for this trip. All I have is this sort of slightly ruined back screen, and that makes viewing your photos in some instances a little bit difficult. So if the photos turn out horrible, that's what I'll blame it on. Aside from that though, I'm really enjoying it. My version was black back in the day, but I'm now wishing I'd bought this silver. Check out this view, by the way. Waiting for the right birds. Oh, nearly. You alright? It's good. I had to be quite quiet because when no one's up,
Yeah.
which I found hard, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I was wondering how you were going to do that.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't talk about, sorry I'm back home now, but one thing I didn't talk about was this blue button on top of the camera, which I think looks awesome. Unfortunately, it signifies you're using the automatic modes, which I never did, but I remember always really liking that. Doesn't take much to please me, admittedly. So yes, if you can't tell, I really like this camera. It doesn't feel 10 years old to me, and I think that's because it was ahead of its time ergonomically. As I said, it's super comfortable. There are some giveaways it's 10 years old, apart from the condition of this specific model. It says full HD on top of the camera, which you don't tend to see cameras boasting about nowadays. Apart from that, I do still think it looks quite modern. Now there is every chance I'm looking at this camera with slightly rose tinted lenses, and that's because this was an incredibly important camera to me. When I had this camera, it was about the time that I started thinking about photography as a potential career. I was really enjoying photography, and I thought, could I do this as a job? And that's a thought that, well, stayed with me for a long time, and through that period I had this camera. So maybe my memories of that time and using this camera have been kind of romanticised a bit for me. Regardless, I do really like it. Now, when I've talked about some of my favourite cameras of the past, including the Panasonic G9, often I'm asked, well, why don't you still use those cameras if they're your favourite cameras? And I suppose it's much like cars. You know, how many people drive their favourite cars? They might have had like a two-seater thing in the past, and they don't anymore, and it's because they've got 4 kids and they need a minivan, which means that your favourite thing is no longer the best thing for you to use. And it's much the same with my cameras now with regard to things like video autofocus. And in short, that's why I'm using big Sony cameras as opposed to this still, because this is still plenty good enough for most things. 16 megapixels, perfect little travel camera. Thank you so much for those comments that made me think about getting one, because I don't think I'd have thought about it otherwise, which is stupid, admittedly. Anyway, thank you for watching. A couple of last bits of housekeeping. Do you like this new desk setup, by the way? It's not quite finished, but I'm playing around with it. Anyway, workshops. So if you're interested, there are 1 or 2 places left on the Namibia workshop that I'm running with Brendan in October. So link in the description to that. And also, we have released a few more places for the Antarctica workshop in 2024. So there's also a link to that in the description too. Also, one last thing, a big thank you to the sponsor of this week's video, mpb.com. I, as I mentioned, got this camera on mpb.com as well as lots of my other photography gear, and it's the first place I look when I'm looking to buy a new piece of equipment. And you can save loads of money by getting your gear used, and you can also sell your gear to free up some cash either for photography trips or other photography gear, or anything else, really. And that process, the process of selling your equipment, is seamless. Basically, you go online, you get a quote on mpb.com, and if you're happy with that quote, then they will book a courier to come and collect your gear, and then when they've got it and they've assessed it, they will pay you. It's as simple as that. It's fantastic. So yes, whether you're looking to free up some cash or you're in the market to buy something new, definitely check out mpb.com. And they operate in multiple territories across the world. It's fantastic. Links in the description. I love it. And actually, just this week, I bought another thing on mpb.com, this 50mm f1.2, which I am so excited about using. So yeah, that'll be featured on the channel at some point, I assume. Awesome. Anyway, big thank you for watching. I'm going to go and sit by the front door and wait for my plants to be delivered for these shelves. I probably won't wait by the door, actually. That's a bit weird, but I'll just do some work or something. I'll see you next time.